So we just read 1 Peter 3, 1 through 2, and then 3 through 4, and just talked about the importance of purity and reverence and how that can affect anybody and help them in their coming to a better faith and a better relationship with God. And then also, we just read about the 1 Peter 3, 3 through 4, about and not growing on the outward adornment as much as looking at the inner self, that our beauty should not come from the outward adornment, but from the inner self. And so I think just for an icebreaker here, what sorts of things do y'all do in the morning to take care of your outward self? I'll start. For instance, I have to do something with these bangs. When I wake up, they're like everywhere. The rest of my hair might be okay, but the bangs, we got to do something with them. What do you guys do? You can put it in the chat if you can't unmic right now. Unmute.
Put on makeup.
Put on makeup. Yeah.
I have to wash my face to wake up.
Yeah.
With cold water. I always wash my face.
That's a real one. That definitely is. And so, you got to think about it, because when you think about what we look like, because usually we don't like, we feel like there's something needs to happen to ourselves when we wake up, but our inner selves can be the same way. When I wake up, my inner self can feel grumpy, kind of rumpledy. And so I want to do something, and we want to do something to take care of that inner self. And it talks about putting on your inner self. So just like we put on something to make ourselves look better on the outside, we want to be able to put on something that helps us to look good on the inside. And part of that, I think, is dealing with sort of the let's call them the blemishes. I woke up this morning, I've got fever blisters, several of them on my lips, because I spent too much time in the sun. And so, when I went out to the store, I covered it up with lipstick, I don't have it covered up too much right now, but so, we try to take care of our blemishes on the outside. How important is it to take care of the blemishes on the inside as well? And we'll talk about this some more later, but you can think about, as you spend time with God, we all know we feel better, and some of those rumpledy places begin to, and those grumpy places begin to smooth out, and then we really do feel like we can have that beauty on the inner spirit. But the book talks about, and it starts going into investigating what these words mean: purity and reverence. And it starts with reverence, and it talks about the definition of reverence, and that the Greek word is phobos, which of course, is the word that would be used in so many phobias that we talk about today, arachnophobia and things like that. It's, a word that has to do with fear. And the definition is fear, dread, or terror. A reverential fear of God is a controlling motive of life in spiritual and moral matters. It is not a mere fear of his power and righteous retribution, but a wholesome dread of displeasing him. It is a fear that influences the disposition and attitude of one whose circumstances are guided by trust in God. Reverential fear of God will inspire a constant carefulness in dealing with others in his fear. So when I was young, I remember I guess I was a sensitive child, but I remember one time I got in trouble for lying. And it was something along the lines of, I didn't, after my shower, I didn't put on clean underwear or something like that. I don't know, but they caught me. My parents caught me in the lie. And I just remember that horrible feeling, getting in trouble, that feeling of shame, that feeling I felt bad because they weren't happy with me. Of course, I had to stay in my room, and there had to be the talk about it and all that kind of stuff. And I think in a way, that is the kind of fear we want to think about having towards God. It's not like this quaking, like it said, a fear of retribution, but that we want to please him and we feel bad, when we don't please him. So there's that kind of reverence. I think that it's a good parallel. When I was on vacation, I had a good talk with one of my children about, she was like, it's so much better because she has clients. I guess I have to say it's Celeste because she's the only one who have clients who have gone through really traumatic situations. And she was talking about how it's really hard for them to just, when they feel like they're stuck in some sinful patterns and they have trouble getting out. And she's like, they just need to feel God's love. And that is really, really true. But the right kind of fear is also a good motivation. And we need to remember that there needs to be a healthy fear of God and that kind of a reverence. And so when we apply that to our relationships, then we can see, let me say it this way, that having a healthy fear of God means that we obey his word and that we put obedience to his word ahead of maybe what we would want to do. And that's a lot what the book talks about. And I really think that was true for me in my marriage, was that there were definitely times when I would get very critical of my husband and he didn't change. It just made things worse, and I finally thought, you know what, this is so crazy. I'm going to do it God's way. I am going to respect him, because God says to respect him. And it really did make a difference in my marriage. So this also applies to, hold on, let me get my next page. Applies to any relationship. It's deciding to treat the other person right, even when, it doesn't seem like that they deserve it, or it's because it's just the right thing to do. And the example they have in the chapter is the example of Uzzah in Numbers 4. And there were two things that happened in the story of Uzzah. First of all, David made the mistake of putting the ark, and when he tried to bring the ark back, he put it in a cart. And then Uzzah made the mistake of touching the ark because the ark was going to fall on the ground. And you think, man, poor Uzzah, he just was trying to help. But, it's such a good example because I think that's what we do. We think we're just trying to help. The ship is sinking. Things are going wrong. We're just trying to help. And we don't think about that we have to do it God's way. I mean, how challenging is that? There's so many times when I probably step in and I'm not being submissive or letting my husband lead because I'm like, the ship is sinking. I just got to do something to help. So I'll step up and lead. And so I'd love to know how you feel like, I'd love to have some discussion here. How do you feel like you maybe have had struggles being reverent to God and obeying him and having that kind of healthy fear, but the healthy fear that you want to please him, and or how can you have a more healthy reverence towards God?
I can share.
Okay.
I think that the way I can have a healthy fear or reverence to God is just by really by really memorizing the word, what the words say about how I could be submissive to my husband, but there's also submissive to my brothers and sisters, and just use those scripture and be like, this is the way God want me to be. Like last night, yeah, we were talking about that, like the way of the cross. Which way is the way of the cross? It's like when you just decide to do what you don't want to do, decide to please God and not yourself.
Yeah. And it really is, when you talk about the way of the cross, we talked about the way of the cross being, being willing to undergo sufferings and also to entrust. And that's the hard part about doing this, is like, how can I trust that if I do it God's way, if I'm, loving my enemies, or if I'm kind to those who it's hard for me to be kind to, or, if I'm submitting to my husband, how, I've got to trust that God is going to work it out.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Come on, guys. You got to have some things or examples or places where it's been a little hard for you to be reverent towards God, or something you want to do better.
I can share. I can't remember exactly the second question, but I was thinking about the importance of confessing and having other people in your life. I remember this was probably a couple months ago when Markia came over, and I was being open with her, just kind of about some things I struggle with as far as respecting my husband, and how helpful it was to get her perspective on it. She was talking about gratitude and things like that. So just having a extra pair of eyes or ears to look into your situation and to speak scriptures to you, I think is very, very helpful.
Yeah, I think that's two excellent points. And we're going to talk some more if we get time. I don't know if we're going to get time to get to the end of our reading today, but when she reads the verse about the older women's teaching the younger women, I think it just applies that we help one another, that we do need to help one another to learn how to do this, because this is the hardest thing. To trust ourselves in these things where it just goes against our nature is the hardest thing. And like you said, just having someone else to help us is really good. And when you talk about speaking scriptures, Gordon said that last night, and I think it's such a good reminder. Reading the scriptures is powerful. It's good if we can quote scriptures to each other. It's even better if we just read them. So they're just powerful. Anybody else have any thoughts on this? One thing I thought of, because it's going to go on and talk about in the next verse, it's going to talk about, more of the respect towards your husband and the reverence towards your husband. And really, this section is the reverence towards God. But in the reverence towards our husband, it talks about Virginia Leffler, who wrote the book, talks about John Gray, who wrote Men Are for Mars and Women Are for Venus, and said men's number one complaint is that the women want to change the men. Women take them on as a project to fix them, to help them grow. And they're like, oh, just accept me. And it reminds me of, when a caterpillar is turning into a butterfly and it goes a cocoon, what happens if you try to open the cocoon before the butterfly is ready to come out?
Would die, no?
It would die, probably, yeah. And yeah, but we want to help things along instead of trusting God and his process, that God, remember the saying that one plants, one waters, but God makes it grow. It's just something about us as women that we think we know better, and we got to get in there and fix things and help them along. And yes, we do need to speak words to people and the verses to people, but we need to also step back and let God, work with them and trust that God is going to make them grow. So anybody else have any thoughts on reverence towards God? All right, the next section is having reverence towards, she is specifically writes in this chapter having reverence towards your husband, but I think it definitely can apply towards men, towards leadership, even towards others, because as I was just talking about, we do a lot of times as women have critical attitudes towards others. And so one of the quotes I wrote down that was at the end of the chapter, you know, we know men only use half a brain, but, you know, we tend to kind of think sometimes of men in that way. We think they're lazy. We think,
Oh, sorry.
we think
Sorry.
that we have a better thought process. We think that we plan better. We think that we execute tasks better. And so, you know, then this is such a challenging chapter. She reads Ephesians 5:33 about how the wives must respect the husband. And we can use that concept in all of our relationships, because, you know, if anybody sat down with Ken and I and had, you know, marriage 2-on-2, you know, we probably read 1 Corinthians 13 about how love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. And the idea being is that we think the best of one another instead of the worst. We see each other in terms of the good things in their heart instead of trying to define them in terms of the thing that, you know, we see that they need to grow in or their weakness. The same thing goes for Philippians 4:8, whatever is true, whatever is noble, you know, etc. Think about those things and how it's so powerful to focus on these things. And that's what I saw in my own marriage. And I still, you know, I still struggle with this, you know, that I was critical so much and I felt like it was justified. I mean, it's like, if there was things that were there, there were things that were there that we needed to grow. And that he began to feel like he was in a hole. And that he could never get out of that hole. That's the way he described it. He would never be good enough. And, you know, that didn't motivate him to change. You know, he just felt like he was going to push back instead of trying to do better. You know, I'm going to stop for a minute. I talk a lot. Does anybody have any thoughts just this far? It's quiet. All right. Well, the book goes on to talk about how Sarah called her husband master. Now this, man, talk about challenging. This is really challenging because master is such a strong word. And I did study on it some, but you know, here's some thoughts that I have as far as that goes. It's revering God. It's revering our husbands. And let me read, actually, this part comes a little bit before the part about Sarah, but I think this is really good and this will lead into that. The definition of showing the respect to our husbands is more about feelings than actions. I wanted to start seeing my husband's best and respond to him in a way that showed a deeper respect and awe from my heart. So practically, what does it mean to respect your husband? When you deeply respect someone, you speak in a manner and tone that makes your respect for them obvious to anyone listening, especially your husband. That means no talking down to him, never being demeaning or demanding. You respect his ideas and choices. When you are in awe, because that's what that respect word means, when you are in awe of someone, you take their input and you seek their advice and allow them to influence your life. It means you listen to their input, even though you know their weaknesses. Man, I feel like we could just camp out on that section there for a minute. When it comes to Sarah, though, and her calling, Abraham, her husband, her master, the book points out that that was the way that Sarah made herself beautiful to God. And in a way, you know what, this really makes sense. Because if we're being critical or we're being prideful, like I know better, and this is the way it should go, and let me get in there and fix things, it's not looking beautiful to God. So maybe it's partly just kind of doing an adjustment on our attitude of, I'm not going to be this person who's prideful, who's critical, but I'm going to try to change to be this person who's trusting in God, and who, I love that description, who respects my husband enough to want to know his opinion, to want his input, to believe the best in him. When we think about what Sarah did, when you read the stories, and, she let Abraham lead. And when I think about my husband, when I sat down and started thinking about this, he's made a lot of good leading decisions over our life. Now I could look at his weaknesses very easily and say, he doesn't do this, he hasn't done that, he needs to do better in this area. But I can also look and say, he's, he made the decision for us to move to Atlanta and become part of this church, 30 years ago. He made the decision for us to move to Auburn. He made many good decisions as far as us raising our children over the years, and really set a great standard for that. So I can trust his leadership in a lot of ways. And I think that's a part of what's going on there. A couple things I want to bring up here as we're talking, because I think they're really interesting. You've talked to me at all, one of my favorite, things to talk about the difference of men and women is not men are from Mars and women are from Venus, but that the book where it says men are like waffles and women are like spaghetti, because men, this book says, they tend to compartmentalize, and they do one kind of like they live in one box at a time, and they fix whatever's in that box, they deal with whatever's in that box, and then they move to the next box. With women, everything's connected. We think about this, and then it's like, oh, and that reminds us of this, and that reminds us of that. And that's like a strand of spaghetti. And the way I see that a lot, because like when my husband says, oh, what shall we do for church on Sunday? And I'm like, well, we got to think about this. And we have to make sure and take this into consideration. It has to be a long discussion for me. I have to look at all sides. And he's more like, you know what? I think we're going to do this. I'm like, no, wait. So it's interesting to me that in a sense, God had, the template. Now, women, of course, are awesome leaders, but the template of men being leaders, they're decisive. God must have felt like it's good to be able to be decisive. Or even, I was reading this, it was a blog post or something, but it was talking about, this woman was talking about, I started thinking about it, and women apologize for everything. If somebody comes over to their house, they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't have a chance to clean my house, or, and all, you can just think about, oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't do this, or I couldn't do that. She says, I've never heard my husband apologize for anything. I never heard him apologize when, someone came over and the house was a little messy. Or I never heard him apologize if he decided, oh, I think I'm going to go hunting. He never said, honey, I'm sorry, I think I'm going to go hunting. He just went. He never apologized when he decided to grow a beard. He just grew it, and I think, maybe there's something different about the way men and women think, where it's good to just do things simply and just be decisive. Just some things to think about. So I've talked a lot, but I wonder what gets in your way. I'd love to hear some sharing. What gets in your way of respecting either your husband or people in your life, people in places of authority? And how do you show disrespect?
Kat, I love the way you said that Sarah called him master. I'm going to have to dig deep. I need you to text me those messages, those scriptures. I'm always going to go back and read it and put it in my version, but I can see how I was listening to you talk, and I see if you're single and you've prayed for a husband and God blesses you with a husband, then I feel like God is going to put the right person in place to lead you. And as women, we have respected people who don't have our best interest in mind, our bosses, our sorority sisters, our friends or whatever. And I think sometimes we tend not to give our husband credit that the credit that they need. I feel like God, this is good for me, what you're saying, because God designed our husbands to lead. And I feel like when we have a husband and we do call him, and I just looked up the revering and the master, and we have things that we have as masters that we don't say they're masters, but they are, and we respect them more sometimes than we respect our husband. I'm talking about me because everything, y'all perfect right here. So but sometimes I think this is good for us to be able to sit back and look at this and say, yes, yes, she called him master, yes, she called him, and God liked that, because in my studies, in my marriage studies, God put things together in order. And so if a husband is going to be over you, he's going to lead you right. He may be a little goofy with it or whatever, it may be a little weird, but God can work on that also. So thank you, Kat, for bringing that up. But the thing that gets in my way is because I am a leader and I am different, like you said, and we do think differently than our husbands. And I think a whole lot different. My husband and I were raised differently. And so that kind of makes us headbutt a lot. But I know when I'm talking about things that I know when I'm getting counseling on certain decisions that I'm going to say to my husband, I think, and the person that is encouraging and counseling me says, well, think about it in his way. Think about what he may think about this way. So I love the fact that you're saying that we need to respect our husbands more and think about their decisions, and I hope they're getting their counseling on their side, Kat, also to also think of our opinions and how they're supposed to treat us and how they're supposed to love on us and all the things they're supposed to do. But I do thank you for that little nugget.
And Kiona, I wrote the verse in the chat. And if you read the very next verse, that was through 1 through 6. If you read the very next verse, it says what husbands are supposed to do. So they should get their counseling as well.
Yeah.
Kat, it's me. Question. Most women I find, at least for myself, I'm speaking of myself, I can be critical, and I find I will voice all the negative things that I don't like about my husband to my husband, which he doesn't want to hear, really. And I think I'm a person who like to plan, and I like to go into the details, the tiny details of whatever it is, so that at the end of the day, we don't have a uh-oh moment or miss something. I like things in place at the right time, and not just, he'll just go off and just do things in a nanosecond. And, come and say, hey, pack up your stuff, we going here. And I'm like, I'll start packing 3 weeks from now, knowing if you had told me that we were going to be leaving today, little things like that. And it's just, I find irritating at times, but he'll just laugh at it and enjoy it, go off enjoying himself. And somehow I just sit back and I'm thinking, how can you be so happy about this right now when it's so messed up? And I think that's a struggle for me right now.
I know, that's the perfect I, that is, I know, Katira's like, that's like Trey too. You know, that's what we're talking about. You know, there's a great video. If you guys ever watch the Holder and his family on YouTube or the videos, they have a getting ready to travel video. And the husband is like, you know, she's like you, doing things 3 weeks in advance, doing all this planning. And he's just like taking a pair of pants out of the dirty clothes and smelling it and saying, "Oh, pack that. I'm ready to go," you know. It's like, you know, so it was great. But yeah, but somehow God made us different, but that doesn't mean that we're better than them. I think that's what's hard. It's like we just keep on thinking, no, they have to be like us. They have to plan all these things. And yet it's really interesting. We have to learn to respect them and where they are, and it's really interesting.
But it's like you are trying to prevent the catastrophe from happening, and you see the possibility of a catastrophe happening 3 weeks down the road. So you do what you're doing now to prevent it from happening later on. And I don't think that's where my husband is at. I don't think so.
And Paulette, honestly, what I think is that God meant for them both to come together. I believe that, you know, we give our input and that helps them to think more about some of these bases and take care of some of these bases, but they also provide, because if you're a woman like me, sometimes you'll dither too much. You'll get too much into the details. And so it really takes a balance of both of those things. And a lot of times to get something done, you really need somebody who can just do it. Just like I said, not apologizing, not feeling guilty, not worrying that, you know, it's just like, no, we're going to do this and that's that. So I think, you know, it's interesting because I really think what God made us, put us together so that it could be better together.
Yes.
Miss Paulette, I love the way you said that. And it's so funny that you say that, and I'm totally different from my husband. I'm on the aspect of like your husband. Oh, let's just go throw in the car, and he's more of a planner, so that kind of makes us head. But what I do want to tell you about that is that people who are carefree and love life and just not plan, they don't think about the logistics of things. They just enjoy the moment. And I think sometimes when we want to plan everything out and want to do everything, it spoils the fun sometimes. And I'm not saying that he should just pack up or whatever, but I know that's for me. And I always like to hear people, the other side of it. So I'm the other side, and my husband's more of the planner. He's more of the careful person. He's more of the saver. I'm more of the spender. So I think, like Kat said, God put everybody together so that you can balance and you can blend. But and I tend to think about, I tell him all the time, I said, well, you know, sometimes there's going to be an old man that would love to, there's another old man that love to jump up in the car and go, and he's lonely or whatever. So I think about that. So when you said that, I thought about it. I said, oh my God, it's a catastrophe. So I get to hear it from your side, from the side of the planner side. And me, I'm just like the last minute jump into the car. So I know that could be very irritating.
Yeah.
And I'm like that too, Kiana. I'm like that, like you. Just like I don't like to be planning things, and my husband like, oh, we got to think about it. We got to, you know, like he's a planner. Like, oh, but you didn't tell me, and I'm like, sweetie, you have a couple days. Like, hello, it's Thursday, and you know, I'm giving you no, but you didn't give me a week ahead. You know, like he's a planner. I'm just like, I like to do things. He's like, you told you make that plan without asking me, and I'm like, because I'm not a planner, you know, I just like to do things, like, you know, feel open to do anything. And he's like, but you didn't talk to me about it. And I'm like, yeah, I know that I didn't, but you got to start talking to me. You got to start talking to me about making plans. And I'm like, you know, because he feel disrespected when I do that, when I make plans and I don't talk to him about it. So I'm learning that before I make any plan, I got to speak to him. Even if I told his sister I want to do this, I'm like, I got to speak to my husband first because I don't know how he's gonna feel. Because he like to know, even if he's okay with me doing anything with the sister, but he would like to know ahead of time. You know, he feel disrespected when I don't do that, and he's a planner like your husband Kiona. He's a planner, and I'm just like open, like let's do this. He's like, no. One day we were walking, and I'm like, that's a nice park. Can we go to the park? And he's like, now? I'm like, yeah, right now, go. He's like, no. I'm like, well, why not? Because we didn't like we kind of didn't plan that. So, I don't want to go to the park. And I'm like, what? But this is a beautiful park. And he's like, no, no. I'm like, oh man. And I just it killed me because it's like I want to do so many things, but I can't do it because he has to plan it. Like, we gotta plan this. You didn't tell me you want to go to this park. So pray for me because I'm having the same issue too.
Yeah, and it really does show the obstacles, the challenges with respecting when you have people like that. I feel like when our family was together, each couple in our family, my kids and their partners or husbands or whatever, there was one that was one of those ways and one that was another. So, how do you respect? How do those of us who have the spontaneous one respect them, and how do those of you who have the more rigid planner, how do you respect them? And so that goes, for the singles as well, because they have to learn to deal with those dynamics as well, whether it's a husband or whatever. They still need to learn to respect that other person. Let's, I think we have time to do one more point. It talks about, it reads Titus 2:3. And Titus 2:3 says, and here we're still on the subject of reverence. Likewise, teach the older women to be reverent in the way they live, not to be slanderers or addicted to much wine, but to teach what is good. Then they can urge the younger women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled and pure, to be busy at home, be kind. Oh, I was only supposed to read 3. Oh, well, anyway, we'll just start there. Stop there. A point here is number one, that the point she makes in the book is that this is a place where older women get. It's actually a point of maturity that older women, can be reverent in the way they live. And she talks about it as just being, that word reverence that's used here is like being consecrated, wholly devoted to God. And all of us want to be, getting to that place where we're more and more devoted to God and not devoted to any things in the world. And so what we want to do then is just like, Katira was talking about with Markia, that we can help each other. We really need to help each other to get that way. And first and foremost, the more mature people in Christ are going to have experience. So, number one, it's their responsibility to help other women. I love Paulette telling us this story because, she can help, people who are wrestling with the very same thing. And so, as I said, it's hard taking the way of the cross. It's really hard. It's hard to figure out, how do we do this in our marriages? How do we do this in our relationships? How do we surrender? How do we respect one another? How do we trust God? And when it seems like the ship is sinking, we want to help. how do we trust God and do it his way and not our way? And that's why we want to teach each other. That's why we need women teaching one another, and it can happen all the way down, because everybody in here has had experience now. Everybody in here, Kelly has probably been a part of us the shortest time, but I know Kelly's very wise. Marisol can tell us she's got lots of good things to say, and she can help a lot. And Kelly's read a million books. And so, all of us have something we can teach. So the question is, are we teaching others, and are we seeking out? Are we seeking out? And I have people that I go to for input. One of them is Diane Johnson, who's part of kind of like a leadership team that helps us here at Auburn Tuskegee. And like I need to go to somebody who's had experience leading a church before and ask her for, input and maturity. So, think about these things. I think this will be our last point for tonight. What are you guys thinking about this verse right here, where it talks about, the older women, being in reverence in the way they live and teaching what is good?
Love the way you said the older women. What category? I have a question. This is a real question, Kat. I'm cutthroat and real. But when the older women teach the younger women how to respect their husbands, is there a 21st century version of it?
A 21st century version? In other words,
like, because I hear in some of the scriptures, it talks about like the lady's supposed to be at home taking care of her house, knitting and doing all that stuff. I think that's what you were saying, where women.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
right.
because
To teach because I didn't read, I stopped reading that verse. It says to be busy at home, to be kind.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, because I think the 21st century version is that they just teach the women how to do the things I talked about, how to surrender, how to continue to work things out and respect their husbands, even if it feels like their husband don't deserve respect. And
I'm not saying that part, but what I'm saying is, like, teach them how to respect, but also where we can also have an opinion, and that we also have not say a boundary, but we have an opinion. I can have an opinion respectfully and say it respectfully to him. And also, you were talking about how the woman is how the older women, maybe I need to have this conversation off the record. Okay.
Yeah, we can have a good, the short answer is in Ephesians 5:21. It says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And even as Peter goes on in 1 Peter 3, it says, husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect as a weaker partner. So it's always a mutual thing. I mean, if a husband's loving like Christ, he's not, as it says in other places in the Bible, lording it over her. It's always a mutual thing, just like we talked about, that somebody who's laid back and be able to do things in the moment needs to kind of blend with the person who's, you don't want to have one person saying, you got to do it my way. They need to learn to be considerate. Anybody have anything else? And there again, I do want to stress, even though it says the older women, and that is a model, all of us are mature in the faith in some way. So we all can teach, we all can seek out, no matter how old we are, we all can seek out input. What is it, Marcia?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll share. So this is a really good lesson one, not because of a husband, but because like in general, like I've led with brothers in the past, so of course all of this is applicable. And I remember Kiana, that's why I clapped her up when she said, because I know I'm a leader. When you know you're a leader and you're put in a position where you have to submit to, I guess, authority, or not just that, brothers, you like, golly, come on, step it up. But it really does work in our favor when we are respectful. I feel like God does look out for us. Like even with the doctor that I work with, she's not my boss or anything, but she is an authority over me because she is the doctor. And some stuff I'll be like, ma'am, that is wrong. You know, I've been in dentistry 8 years and you're behind, just graduated last year. So I try to be prideful, like I know better, versus just being kind and patient with her and just like sometimes I do, but a lot of times I'm sick of it. A lot of times I'm just like, look, man, I'm sick of it. And I have an attitude sometimes, but recently I just realized you got to be compassionate, you got to be kind, you got to be soft. I think that wins people a lot more than trying to be forceful and take control. And I've noticed since I've been doing that, of like, I'm just gonna do what people asking me, no matter who it is, my coworkers, my dad, anybody, just do what they asking me instead of just trying to take control. And I feel a lot lighter, free, and happier because I'm not thinking about, well, you're wrong and it's gonna make me look bad, but more of I'm just gonna respect. I'm just gonna do what they say. And if they see it wrong later, they'll come back and tell me, okay, Marquis, you know, I should have done it your way, or I should have, you know, sought advice, or, you know, this, that, or the third. But this is a really hard thing for me. Like, this subject is very, very hard. Like Kiana said, because I am a leader, and this is the 21st century. Like, women are leaders now, but at the same time, God's word is God's word. It don't change. And
Markia, when I said that, and that's what I was asking Kat about, like, okay, I'm gonna give you an example. Like, for instance, if we're doing church, if we're like, for instance, if you have an older lady, I'm not what's going on with our church. I don't know what's going on with the banking in our church, but this is just an example. You said the older ladies are supposed to teach the younger ladies, but what if the younger lady knows something that could help you? And like, for instance, let's say, for instance, the banking, and we have a older lady that's doing the banking for the church forever. I don't know what's going on with the banking. I'm just using it as an example. And now we're going to mobile banking and online banking, but the older lady doesn't want to do it that way. She wants to do it the old way, where she's at the calculator and she's doing it the old version. But I have a way that's going to be a little bit faster, going to be a little bit more up to date, and going to help things move. Because, you know, just like I said, this is the 21st century, and I'm using that as an example of how I know the older ladies are supposed to teach us, but now when things are changing and moving in a different way, how do you handle that when you have a situation like that?
Well, Kiana, I'm doing the banking, and if somebody younger wants to take it over, we can talk about that. But I think the scripture that applies in that situation is 1 Corinthians 12, where we each have different gifts. You know, one's like a hand, one's like a head, one's like a foot or whatever, you know. And so my thought there is, yes, the older women teach the younger women. And I think that has more to do with character issues. I think that, you know, if somebody has a gift and knowledge in like finances, then that's what they bring to the table and that's what they can work in. If somebody's good with working with kids, they can do that. If, you know, so I think, you know, you definitely, even if you're young, you can work and you can contribute and help the older people in all kinds of ways.
But okay, I love the way you said that. You flipped it on the character. What if the character is an old-fashioned way? I consider old-fashioned. Maybe that's something we just need to sit down and talk about.
Well, you know what? It's 8 o'clock. I think, and there's a little more because we still have this section on purity. Why don't we pick this up next week? You know, let's give me your questions, Kiana, and not next week, 2 weeks from now. And we will continue this very cool discussion because there's a lot of good stuff to talk about here.
That sounds cool.
All right, ladies. So if anybody wants announcements, if anybody wants to, let me stop the recording.